Good evening, everyone. Hi, and glad to see all of you here. Glad to be on this panel with very distinguished panelists with me. Thank you, Vasu, for making it happen. Thank you for asking me to do this. I think I'm going to like doing it. Tove Beck Friedman, an Israeli artist, once said that we all live inside boundaries, and some of these are physical boundaries, but some of these are just implied and cognitive boundaries. I think more or less that's what we're going to be talking about today from various sorts of points of view. Before we start off, I thought I'll just put 3 ideas on the table, and then we can see how over the course of the evening we approach these ideas. It's just it just kind of opens it up a bit. One is, of course, straightforward. The subject of our conversation today: does art work inside silos? Do the various art forms work inside silos? Are there boundaries? Should those boundaries be dissolved? Or, are we all happy with those boundaries, and can we just work within those? And we look at that idea. There is a second idea also which sort of struck me, is that when we speak of boundaries, it need not necessarily mean the boundaries between the various arts. There are other kinds of boundaries that we are also talking about. For instance, where is art experienced? Who gets to experience it? How do they experience it? And those also have ways of creating boundaries. In that context, I wanted to share something with you. I read a while ago that in Victoria, in Australia, a bunch of factories shut down in a sort of an industrial ban in that region. And when that happened, it affected the economy of the region pretty badly, and hundreds of people lost jobs, and townships sort of started to die down. Economy was affected. At that point of time, there was this artist called Van Helton who created massive artworks on the abandoned silos of these factories, massive artworks. And he created a series of those, and various other towns nearby in that same belt sort of picked up on the idea, and they too created these enormous artworks on these abandoned silos. And then, as a result of that, was born the Silo Art Tour. And then people started to come in as tourists, and then they would fill petrol in their cars, and they would eat and maybe stay over for a while. And even as we speak, a tiny sort of tourist economy is growing in these areas. And for me, this was a very wonderful example of how art can actually become part of everyday life. It can be a part of the economy and not necessarily be some sort of esoteric thing. And I thought over the course of our conversation, maybe this too could come up. And the third thing, of course, is the most, I'm trying to get the correct word because I'm sure I'm going to be lambasted. A very sort of superficial and simplistic, or the most direct approach to the idea of dissolving boundaries is often when two sorts of art forms choose to perform on the same stage or choose to share the same space. And in that context, I'm going to be just a little bit provocative here. When I say go for a concert, and Hussein is painting in the background, and he's trying to interpret the raga that is being sung in the foreground, say, on that stage. And he does this painting, and I'm looking at it. I'm thinking to myself that it doesn't necessarily deepen my experience. I'm thinking to myself that I am happy to spend hours in prayer in front of a Hussein painting all by myself. I'm happy to listen to the concert all by itself when it goes on. When these two things get together on stage, is it necessarily deepening my experience, or am I saying, oh, all right, so what? Geeta, on that note, do you want to come in as an art critic of many years? Do you think that the most direct approach works? Do you think other things work?
Thank you. I have to say that I think what you've said is very provocative, but before I get to that, let me just say that it's wonderful to be here with so many people. It's almost like being the alumni of the old Cholamandalam group, because I think for a lot of us, that period, the 22 years that Vasudev and Arnavaz were in Cholamandalam, and Yamuna and all the theatre people I see here, we didn't believe or imagine that there were boundaries. There was no question of that. And I would say that the film made by Chetan and Navroze, if all of you have seen it, will elucidate this idea that it's not a question of boundaries, but a state when you continually discover things. And I hope that all of you have seen the film. I have another reason for liking the film personally, because I think I have to thank Navroze for making me look so glamorous, so that if I were to audition, I might become a Rajnikant's mother or something, right? And I have yet another connection with Rajnikant that I've never shared with anyone. We were both born in the same hospital in Bangalore. He may have been a little younger, and he probably doesn't know this, otherwise he'd be calling me for his daughters. But you see, these are connections which you come across as you progress in life. And I think the most amazing thing about Vasudev's work and the film is at different stages of his life, he has taken up these challenges, and it's become part of his life. There's a remark that Shanta Guhan, who's not here this evening, made that Vasudev is not really lucky to be twice born. He's fortunate enough to have been married to two very strong women, twice. Twice married, of course, one after the other, thank God. And he's also had two domiciles, I mean, the one in Cholamandal and the other in Bangalore. Now, of course, I will talk about the Cholamandal residence, because that was a very important part for the art scene in Chennai. I mean, everyone feels that art, meaning painting and sculpture, was not recognized, and which was why Panikkar created this idea of a village. And talking about boundaries, I feel these are all artificial constructs that we like to, as writers and critics, we like to imagine, because we like to put things into neat little slots. But traditionally, if you think of Tanjavur temple or even Kapali temple, all the arts were part of the same mainstream. It could be dance, it could be sculpture, it could be art, it could be religion, thought, and every other form, textiles, all kinds, mural painting, everything was there. And in a similar way, when I look back, I think Cholamandal was a new kind of temple for the arts. Of course, I call it a laboratory for the arts. And within that, you had Panikkar as the sort of high priest, and all these younger people exploring their own identities. Again, this was the first generation of artists after independence, and that spirit was what I think inspired people like Vasu, Douglas, Thambi, all the other artists here I can't name. I think they lived not because of boundaries, but because there were no boundaries. There was this tremendous sense of freedom to explore all kinds of experiences. I know that Yamuna, for instance, the sort of theater group, the plays that she attempted, they were American, there was British, but there was also Girish Karnad's Hayavadana. I can still think, it makes my hair stand up when I think of her production of Hayavadana. And that production had musicians, dancers, and people using textiles in a most extraordinary way. When I think of Cholamandal, at the same time I also think of Chandralekha. Another space, another kind of artistic influence, but also so vital to the culture of Chennai at that time. And Chandralekha's sort of spirit was everything was possible, whether it was thought or people coming in. And I have one little story which I'm sure Sadanand will remember, where she talked about this oceanographer. I forget his name, of course. And this man said, do you know that in the Ganges, there are these creatures known as the Ganges dolphins. And when they leap and play about in the Ganges, you can feel the vibrations on your shore here in Cholamandal. Now, maybe this is a very romantic idea, but that fact that this is how artists actually are inspired. You don't actually have to see the dolphin, but in some way, if somebody tells you about it, these things are absorbed in your own way of thinking. An artist, whether it's a painter or a dancer or a sculptor, changes the way you look at life. And I think this is what this dolphin story did for me. I mean, I've gone many times at the beach at Elliott's or Cholamanal, but I have never thought about the dolphins. And this idea of dolphins leaping, of life being complete, is what I see in Vasudev's work. When I think of Cholamandal, I also think of the beach, and so much of that, the texture of the beach. You know, when you walk on the beach, you see these small little creatures called crabs, the sand crabs. And when the sand crabs digs itself, it leaves out little pellets of sand, making these little floral kind of designs, you know, little starbursts. And I see that same kind of little dots in Vasudev's work. Maybe that's fanciful. And I remember also that in his garden, which was quite a wild garden, the gardener with his broom would always sweep in these circular kind of patterns. And when you look at the line, you know, the famous line which is supposed to be part of the Madras movement, these are the lines which I think have flowed from the garden into the canvas. And the tree form, which I don't know what, I mean, there's one, when you see the film, Vasu says that his father wanted to be an engineer, he wanted to be a doctor, maybe an architect, but his father was a farmer really, right? You say an agriculturist. And when I see, and that he was very disappointed that Vasu did not become an agriculturist, but I realized that he's planted more trees in his work than any agriculturist. And they're wonderful trees. And trees have also been a kind of motif in Islamic art. You talk about, you know, the paradise of birds in Rumi's poetry, in Buddhist art, and of course in Cholamandal, the unifying thing was the banyan tree. All those early discussions, those early, you know, that we had coffee. I think there was somebody called Manikam's coffee bar there. We had coffee from there. So these things are not something you think about. These are sort of things you experience. And when you talk about, you wonder whether you see a dance and a painter painting away. Hussein, of course, was famous. I think we need to be continually exposed to something until it becomes part of oneself. A one-time experience is not going to make you a great sort of lover of that art or poem or thing. You have to be continually in that mode where you can experience this. I think I will now stop and pass it on to you.
Thanks, Geeta. That was wonderful. And I'm glad you brought up the film that Navroze made, and Chetan, of course. But, I mean, Vasu himself, of course, as an artist, has been the embodiment of how these boundaries don't exist for him. He's been inspired by poetry, he's been inspired by music in his work. So, and that film that Navroze made, Navroze, I wondered, you've made many documentaries, and you're also a very eminent still photographer, and you have that absolutely wonderful series on jazz musicians, which is in the Smithsonian, which is just so wonderful. Then you have this film on Vasudev. What is, you're a photographer artist. As an artist, how does one approach the work of filming the life of another artist? And does it come with constraints? Do you have to tread cautiously in some places? or, does it just flow naturally?
Go back to the very first thing that you started with, about the artists in Australia and those abandoned factories. Yeah, sorry, and the abandoned factories that she talked about. Well, in Baroda, there's a group of industrialists whose factories were abandoned. And they had gone in a loss or whatever it was, and there were huge factories which are completely abandoned. And they have given it over to the artists of Baroda, free of charge. They can work there, they have cranes, they've got electricity, they've got water, they bear the expenses of it, and a lot of artists from all over the country, especially sculptors, because sculptors need a lot of space, they need movement, they need very, very heavy equipment to cast and to, so trolleys, and actually it's like a little factory that helps. So lot of people have shifted out of Baroda after their graduation, and then they are coming back over there. So there's something similar like that is happening here also. Now in my personal case, I studied painting and photography in Baroda. When I was studying, there was no university in the world that gave you a degree in photography. So you had to do some subject like sculpture or painting or commercial art or art history to get a BA degree in it. So I joined Baroda Faculty of Fine Arts, and my intention was from the very beginning to become a photographer, and that is the journey that I took. And after that I went to study cinema. Now the studies of cinema in India are unfortunately purely technical. There is a camera department, there is a editing department, there is a sound department, and there is an acting department. I don't know what they do in acting anyway. Then there is direction, and in the direction department, so everywhere there was a qualification required to get into Pune. So when I took my portfolio, I was already established as a photographer. By the time I was 20 years old, in Bombay I was working. And I took my portfolio and I thought that I would simply walk into the cinematography department, And they said, no, we can't take you because you have not done engineering. So I was shocked, So I had to do 2 years of engineering or science before I could become a... So I said, look, I don't want to repair cameras, I want to create something. They said, no, you can't, very sorry. So I walked out, and I was walking back because I wanted to then do my MA in Baroda. And those days, nobody went to the film school. So there was vacancy in every department. So they called me back and said, look, you go into direction, because there they will teach you a little bit of cinematography. So they called me back, and there was 2 vacant seats. Now today, 15,000 people apply for 15 seats in every department, Then there was just absolutely nobody going there. So that was my connection. And then I studied cinematography again in America and a little bit in Japan. And the process of being a photographer, you have to study fine arts. You see, that is the basic thing. Like you go to a school, the best film schools today are in Cuba and in East European countries. It's a 5-year course, and first 2 years is fine arts before you even touch a camera or go near a film editing table. And the director, the direction class has to do history of art, they have to do history of journalism, they have to do literature, and only then they step in. So for a filmmaker, all these things, all these disciplines are absolutely necessary, because it is the only art, I would say 20th century art, where every kind of discipline that we require in our house, in our life, is in one film. From a caterer who makes tea, to a person who photographs it, to a person who will bring the film, or a driver, every kind of person that you require in life is required to make a film. So it's a very collective thing. So anyway, the director, Chetan...
Navroze, specifically, how does a grounding in visual art help as a photographer?
Well, the thing is that when you go to study cinematography, you study composition, which you already studied 4 years in a painting school. You study perspective, you already studied, the masters. If you are going to do source lighting, then that if you studied Rembrandt, it is very easy to replicate that. But you have to study all these things, What is your reference? Cinema is only 150 years old. You know, so what is the reference? What is the reference for all of us? To fill up our brains with, you know. So when I was collaborating with Chetan to make the film on Vasudev, so my background was already there, you know, about color, about all these kind of things. So that is why it was simpler, you know.
And you two were friends, I know, I'm aware that both of you are friends, but do egos clash as well? Did you fight when you made the film?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, that whatever you may say or whatever you may do, on the set, director is God. If he says that you have to put the camera between somebody's bottom hole, you know, you have to do it. You may argue and you may say, no, this is not the thing, but if he says that you have to do it, you have to do it. So all actually cinema in cinematography, sound and editing are actually the tools of a director, that he himself is putting that vision, an art director, actor, everything are his tools. You know, if he did not have that idea, we wouldn't be there. You know, so that's the thing.
So it's the director's vision is what you're saying.
Yes. So everyone is actually helping, and if you are friendly and if you don't fight and if you collaborate properly, the whole film comes out to be better, you know. You can see, you know, I mean, of course, egos clash.
Yes.
If of course, egos do clash, and film directors are very egotistical. Some of the artists also are, you know, I must say. So you have to balance.
Negotiate and
yes,
balance.
Negotiate, definitely.
That's lovely, and the film, as Geeta says, is a marvelous film. But it also brings me to the next point, which is that I had a conversation with the artist Neelima Sheikh a while ago when I was doing an interview with her. And she said something very interesting. She said that she always talks of extending viewership of her works.